Hello and good evening. You're watching Eye on Africa on France 24. Here's what's coming up in the show. Violence erupts in Senegal as Ousmane Sonko is sentenced to 2 years in prison. His fate as a presidential candidate in 2024 remains uncertain. A controversial bill gets the green light in Zimbabwe. Parliament approves a plan to outlaw criticism of the government ahead of elections in August. And as the United States imposes sanctions on both parties to the conflict in Sudan, we head to Cairo to meet a family displaced by the violence. But first, clashes have erupted in Dakar, Senegal this Thursday after a court sentenced opposition leader Ousmane Sonko to 2 years in prison. Sonko was acquitted of the most serious charge of rape, but was found guilty of corrupting youth, a charge relating to an alleged sexual relationship with a woman under the age of 21. Sonko has long argued the allegations are a politically motivated attempt to prevent him running for office next year. Reporting now from Dakar, here's our correspondent, Sam Brics.
The scenes in this Dakar neighbourhood are just like those across the country. Supporters of the Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko are furious that he has been found guilty of corrupting the youth.
We want justice to be fair. We want Ousmane Sonko to be freed. They accused him of rape, and considering he was acquitted of that charge, we must free him.
We're ready to follow our leader, Ousmane Sonko, up until he wins the election in 2024. Ousmane Sonko is the leader of the youth.
The verdict delivered on Thursday saw Mr. Sonko handed a 2-year prison sentence, which, if upheld, will disqualify him from next year's presidential race. Mr. Sonko's lawyers believe their client is victim of a political witch hunt.
If we consider that Ousmane Sonko didn't rape Adji Sarr, it's because this whole affair has been made up. Those behind this affair must be held accountable.
Meanwhile, the Senegalese government insists that justice has been done.
No one could force this judge to declare there's been a rape when he's not convinced there was one. At the same time, these insurrectionists can't try to scare the judge into acquitting Mr. Sonko altogether. At the end of the day, the judge ruled in line with his sincere convictions. All this is a reflection of the impartiality of the judge and the independence of the justice system.
The clashes we're currently seeing in the capital, Dakar, as well as elsewhere in the country, places like Zimbabwe, are likely to go on well into the night.
Sam Brics for us there. Now, critics have called it a dark day for democracy in Zimbabwe. Its parliament has approved a controversial law that outlaws criticism of the government. Those convicted face a possible jail term of up to 20 years. The law has raised fears that the government could try to crack down on dissent ahead of August's election, when President Emerson Mnangagwa will seek a second term in office. Lauren Bersticker has more.
Meant to encourage people to love their country, Zimbabwe's latest patriotism law is being slammed as the death of free speech by the opposition. Critics see it as a clear attempt to crack down on dissent and ban criticism of the government.
We are very worried as a movement about the weaponization of the law and the criminal abuse of ZANU-PF's majority in parliament to pass draconian laws. This is obviously a claim down on democratic voices and freedom of speech.
The bill was passed by Zimbabwe's lower house on Wednesday and still needs to be approved by the Senate and the president to become law. It seeks to criminalize acts that damage the sovereignty and national interests of the country and carries penalties of up to 20 years in prison. But the opposition warns the law's vague language could easily lead to abuse, especially as Zimbabwe gears up for general elections in August.
So they want this law to try and put fear in the hearts of the electorate, in the hearts of the opposition, by using this bad law, which is coming on the eve of an election.
Emerson Mnangagwa, who's seeking a second term in office, has been criticized for passing a series of laws curtailing free speech in recent months. The latest patriotism bill could represent another weapon for the 80-year-old to crack down on dissent and cast aside political challengers.
In other news, the United States has imposed sanctions on companies accused of fueling the conflict in Sudan. They are affiliated both to the army and the rival RSF paramilitary. The sanctions do follow weeks of violence that have killed hundreds of civilians, including 18 people at a market in Khartoum earlier this week. Now, more than 1 million people have been forced to flee the violence, and Sudan's northern neighbour, Egypt, is currently hosting the largest number of refugees. Our correspondent, Nuria Tessin, has met up with one family in Cairo to hear how they're coping in their new temporary home.
Rahim happened to be in Cairo when the war started in Sudan. This apartment he rented for vacation became then a shelter where this gallery owner from Khartoum welcomed his sister, Niema. 8 months pregnant, she fled the Sudanese capital with her 2 children, Tamara and Mustafa.
It wasn't just the war and the shooting and the killing. The first few days we had to stay on the floor whenever there was shooting because we were very scared. Honestly, the day I arrived, it was the first time I got to sleep for more than 2 hours straight. For a whole month, I could not sleep. I could not sleep.
Like Niema, more than 170,000 people have entered Egypt from Sudan. The United Nations Refugee Agency is warning about the humanitarian crisis.
But their situation requires urgent attention. Multiple households living in one flat, one apartment. Lots of children whose schooling has been interrupted, but they're also so shocked and can't understand, can't make sense of what has happened.
From Cairo, Rahim is trying to help artists in Sudan organize a crowdfunding campaign. He works for their works trapped in his gallery in Khartoum and tries to come to terms with his new status.
I've never imagined it the way I'm living it today. First of all, I never thought that I would be in this situation at all. This is not something I've ever processed or even imagined or even said, what if? And now that I am in it, it does not come anywhere close to what I thought I understood of my refugee friends. You know, I thought I understood them. I thought I understood what they were going through. I clearly didn't.
Niam and Rahim, more than 350,000 Sudanese have been forced to flee to neighboring countries without knowing if they will go back home one day.
Our team in Cairo reporting there. Now, top diplomats from the Brics nations have called for a rebalancing of the global order during talks in South Africa this Thursday. The bloc's foreign ministers representing Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa are seeking a larger voice on the world stage. But as Nadine Teron now reports from Cape Town, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has overshadowed the talks.
One of the hot topics on this year's agenda is the establishment of a Brics currency. Its aim would be to empower emerging currencies, according to South Africa's Foreign Affairs Minister Naledi Pandor. On Thursday, Pandor said that the new development bank briefed them on strengthening its African Development Bank arm as a way to mitigate the impact of war-related sanctions. This Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting precedes the Brics Heads of State Summit to be held in Johannesburg in August. But Pandor said the arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin was not discussed at the meeting. President Cyril Ramaphosa is still taking legal advice on how not to arrest Putin if he attends the summit. This is because the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for Putin's arrest for deporting Ukrainian children. But in 2015, Sudanese war criminal Omar al-Bashir attended an African Union summit in Johannesburg and left the country unscathed despite his ICC arrest warrant. Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov denied rumors that the Brics is considering moving the summit's venue from Johannesburg to a non-ICC member country like China as a way to evade Putin's arrest. Meanwhile, the South African rand plummeted to a new record low amidst growing American concerns about the country's friendship with Russia.
Nadine Teron for us there. Now, next Monday is World Environment Day, and so for our last story on the show, we take you to Cameroon, where campaigners are trying to clean up the country's act. Cameroon produces about 600,000 tonnes of plastic waste every year, and activists say far more should and could be recycled. Indira Ayuk has this.
In Cameroon, waterways in most public places are blocked by plastic litter. It's this kind of environmental pollution that non-governmental organizations like Game Changers are determined to eradicate. Patundango leads a group of about 30 young volunteers. She takes them through a campaign dubbed Walk and Clean. They pick plastic waste off the streets of Cameroon's capital, Yaoundé.
It is important to make people realize how damaging our everyday consumption habits are, and the fact that we need to start making the right decisions to refuse to even use these plastics in the first place.
A few kilometers further, at the Mfundi River, which cuts across the city of Yaoundé, there is a thick carpet of plastic bottles. Members of Jeunes Volontaires pour l'Environnement are involved in another environmentally friendly project, Trash Challenge. They're collecting as many plastic bottles as they can.
Cameroon's youth accounts for 70% of the population. Young people buy fizzy drinks in plastic bottles. They buy plastic water bags. So they are major contributors. But they're also the best way to get the message across.
Created in 2014, Name Recycling set up this factory to recycle plastic waste in Cameroon's economic capital, Douala. About 600 tons of waste from around the country are processed here. After treatment, these bottles will be used again. The circular economy can return value to what was once rubbish.
By giving value to plastic waste, we'll get more people to take interest in recycling. When they see a plastic bottle, they'll understand its importance, its economic value.
Despite collecting 10,000 tons of plastic waste, Name Recycling still has a long way to go. Only about 10% of the 600 tons of plastic waste produced annually in Cameroon is currently recycled.
And that report brings us to the end of Eye on Africa this evening. Thanks for watching, and do stay with us here on France 24.